Hello, dear student. I welcome you once again to this wonderful lesson as we look at social studies in Standard 8. Remember, in social studies, we have been looking at a number of issues. But today, we are having another special unit, and Unit 17, that is where we are. And Unit 17 is divided into three parts. There is Part 1, 2, and 3. But today we'll be looking at Part 1. Now, today I am having here the independent Malawi. The independent Malawi. If you remember, last time we were looking at how Malawi was colonized or administered by the colonial government. So we have looked at a number of issues on that. Now, later on, Malawi got its independence. How did it happen? This is the lesson that we are to look at. So the independent Malawi is a wonderful lesson. So be there as we look at Part 1 in Unit 17. Let's proceed. As you know, the work is big. Now let us proceed to this independent Malawi. By independence, or independence, means governing or ruling oneself and being free from another country's rule. When we say independence, it means being free from being ruled by another country. As we looked at last time, remember that Malawi was looked at by or was ruled by which country? I guess you're right, that is Britain. It was ruled by Britain. Now, to be independent, it means now the country is on its own. So Nyasaland therefore fought for independence to free herself from the British rule. So that independence did not just come freely. Malawi had to fight. There were some fights. They had to fight. It cannot be a physical battle, but there were ways of fighting that was there. So we're going to look at how did Malawi become independent. So let us look at the fight for independence of Malawi, the fight for independence. So the following events contributed to Malawi's achievements of self-government, followed by independence and republican status. Here, what we see now is what we are going to learn. We are going to talk about the issues or the stages of the fight for independence. How did it go for Malawi to become independent? So let us look at this. Number one, we are going to look at the formation of Nyasaland African Congress, which was the NAC. Secondly, the growth of the Nyasaland African Congress. Nyasaland African Congress. The same, after it was formed, then how did it grow? So we're going to look at the growth of that Nyasaland African Congress between 1949 and 1960 under Dr. Hastings Kamzubanda's leadership. Then we're going to look at the formation of the Malawi Congress Party. So these are the three areas that we're going to look at as stages on which Malawi traveled to gain its independence. So the formation of the Nyasaland African Congress, the growth of Nyasaland African Congress, and the formation of the Malawi Congress Party. So these are the issues. To begin with, let us look at the formation. How was the Nyasaland African Congress formed? How was it formed, the Nyasaland African Congress, the NAC? In 1943, what happened was that the colored people in Nyasaland began asking for separate schools from those of the Africans. They hated being classified as Africans or natives. So in 1943, it happened that those colored people, the people of the coloreds are the people who were born out of maybe mixed races. So they hated to be associated with the black people. So they said, they were pestering the government to say, give us our own schools. We don't want to learn with these black people. So it started like that. Why? them did not want to be associated with the Africans. So Africans therefore decided to form the Nyasaland African Congress, the NAC, in 1944. So Levi Mumba was the first chairman. So looking at the segregations, looking at the things that were started by these the colored people, then Africans now, they formed a grouping which was called Nyasaland African Congress. Who was the leader? I said Levi Zeriro Mumba. Lev Mumba was the chairman of this Nyasaland African Congress. So other key people were James Sangara, Charles Mlanga, Issa Rollins, Ilaton Mposa, and Louis Bandawe. So these ones, they were the leaders, other leaders of this Nyasaland African Congress. So take note of this, that this one had, or this Congress had its own leaders. What were the objectives? The objectives. Now, let us look at the objectives. What were the objectives of this Nyasaland African Congress? So here are some of the objectives that we have to look at. Why was it formed, the Nyasaland African Congress? Number one, to have African representation in the Legislative Council, the Legico, now called the Parliament. So number one, we are saying that this Nyasaland African Congress, it was formed to have a representation in the Parliament, that Parliament of the that government, that is the colonial government. Number two, to ask government to provide better education for Africans rather than missionary education, which was too religious. So they also asked for secondary school education. So the Nyasaland African Congress, led by Lev Mumba, they also wanted to have schools, better schools, not schools that were just taught people how to read the Bible. No, they wanted even advanced schools. They wanted secondary schools as well. And also to ask government to take over missionary hospitals, which asked poor Africans to pay for the cost. You know, the missionaries, when they came, they established some schools and also the hospitals. But in those hospitals, people were paying. In those schools, people were paying. So they wanted to ask the government to say, please, the government, take over the hospitals so that we should not be paying when we go to the hospital. So that was another objective. Another objective was to ask the government to assist Malawian soldiers returning from the World War II and families of those who died in the war. So another objective again was to say they wanted to ask the government to say, please assist the soldiers who went to fight in the World War II. Between 1939 and 1945, there was the World War. The whole world went into war. So even here in Malawi, some people, some soldiers were taken to go to fight in the World War. So this Nyasaland African Congress wanted the government to assist those soldiers who went to the war and now they were back. And also to fight against discrimination. To fight against discrimination. They wanted to fight against discrimination and the insults from Europeans. So they wanted no discrimination should be there. However, the Congress became weak. What made the Congress to be weak? So number one, weak leadership. Number two, tribalism. Number three, misuse of Congress money by the treasurer and chairperson like H. Tungande and Charles Matinga. And number four, the death of powerful people like Lev Mumba and Issa Rollins in the Congress. So we see here that later on, this Congress, it was not powerful. It was weak. It was weak to stand or so that its voice to be heard to the government. So why was it weak? We are saying that because of weak leadership. After Lev Mumba died, then those who came after him, they were weak. Tribalism. Other people, they thought that they were more Malawians than others. As a result, they started segregating. Hey, you the Chewa, hey, you the Tomboka, hey, you the Yao. As a result, they failed to make one voice to be heard to the government. You know, the government was the government, the British government. It was not the Malawian people who were running the government. But the Malawians were divided. Why? Because of tribalism. And also misuse of Congress money. We have talked of misuse. They misused the Congress money. They became too corrupt. We have mentioned of Mr. Tungande and Charles Matinga. They became corrupt. And the death of Lev Mumba, who was powerful, it led this Nyasaland African Congress to be weak. Now, let's look at the growth. How did it grow, this Nyasaland African Congress? We have said that the fight for independence went through 3 stages. Number 1, it was the formation of this Nyasaland African Congress. Number 2, the growth of this Nyasaland African Congress. Now, after it was formed, of course it was weak sometime, but later it grew. What made it grow? Between 1949 and 1960, under Dr. Kamzubanda's leadership. So a weak Congress soon became strong because of a number of factors. Number 1, in 1953, the British government imposed the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. So Salisbury, which is now Harare, was made the federal capital. So most developments took place in southern Rhodesia, that is Zimbabwe, and Nyasas therefore became more united to fight for independence. What we are saying here is that we talked of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. So during that time, most of the things they were happening in Zimbabwe. And therefore, what happened was that Malawians, therefore, they took that as an advantage to get united so that they fight for independence, to say, we cannot have our capital city in Harare. No. So they forbade that. So they became united. Number 2, the Congress was now led by young and highly educated people like Kanyama Chume, Henry Masauko Chipembere, Oton Chingole Chirwa, and Dondozo Chisiza. So later on, after those people who were weak, those who ate the money because of corruption went out, then later on the Congress was reorganized with more educated people. The Kanyama Chume, Dondozo Chisiza, Masauko Chipembere. Those were educated young men. So they came together with one voice to fight for their independence. Now, these ones, they did not want the federation because they were afraid. They were afraid because of a number of issues. So they didn't want the federation. So they were fighting against this federation. Why were they afraid of the federation? Nyasaland would not get safe government, and white insults and discrimination, which were very common in Rhodesia, that is southern Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, would be more felt in Nyasaland. So Nyasaland would not get the safe government with the federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. So they did want that federation, a united of Nyasaland and Rhodesia. So they did want, because it would advance discrimination. So they therefore began demanding for a vote for Africans, that is a safe government. So these young men who now advanced the Nyasaland African Congress, they began to demand for a voice and a vote of Africans. And they decided to call for Dr. Banda, Hastings Kamzubanda, a medical doctor, to lead them. Then later on they sat down, so right, we need someone who has been exposed outside so that he should come and lead us. And then identified Dr. Banda, who was by then, who had been in America, in Britain, and in Ghana. So he had been outside for quite long. So they invited him. So Dr. Banda had already been supporting the Congress by providing funds, advice, and encouragement. So Dr. Banda, while he was outside there, he heard what was happening here. So he was supporting them with some money to push on, to keep on getting united. So they felt like, oh, this one who is supporting us, maybe he can be a good person to come and lead us to fight with one voice. Now, in 1957, Ghana became the first independent black African state with Kwame Nkrumah as the first prime minister. So this encouraged educated people in Nyasaland and Dr. Banda to fight for independence. So again, when the Africans in Malawi heard that in Ghana people have gained that independence, then they started to get that courage to say, even us, we can be independent. And the colonial government imposed agricultural rules in which Africans were to dig bands to control soil erosion. So the aim was to produce more food, which was needed in Britain after the end of Second World War. So Africans were forced to do it, and failure to do it meant paying fines or imprisonment. So the Congress was looked at as an answer to the issue. So there was also another big issue this time. People were forced to make bans for to control soil erosion, for farming, more food that was needed in Britain, because that time Britain had just been out of the war, so they needed more food. So people got united through this Nyasaland African Congress because they looked at it as an answer to their problems. So Dr. Banda returned to Malawi on 6th July 1958 after staying in America, Britain and Ghana for over 30 years. So he took over the leadership of the Congress and it became much organized. So when Dr. Banda came, then it became much organized, and when he came, he took the leadership of the Nyasaland African Congress. Now, what did Dr. Banda do when he came to lead the Nyasaland African Congress? Number one, he toured the country and appealed to people to break what he called the stupid federation and obtain safe government rule. So he went across Malawi. Telling them to break out of the stupid federation, to say Nyasaland cannot be together with Zambia and Zimbabwe. No. So we need to be independent. So he attacked agricultural laws which were very unpopular among the villagers and traditional leaders. So the laws of making people to make bans for the colonial farms, that one, and many other rules, he attacked those agricultural laws to say they are bad laws, we don't need them. And already Africans did not like those laws. And he addressed public rallies with shouts of freedom, ufuru, and mtendere. So Dr. Banda used to say freedom, ufuru, and mtendere. So he advanced those slogans to people to say we need freedom, we need ufuru, we need mtendere. And he raised money for the party by issuing membership cards. So he started the issue of membership cards, and the money that was raised, they were used for the Congress. And also he organized a very powerful women's league and youth league. So he also made the women's league and the youth league. So that's what he did. And also he raised money for the party by issuing membership cards. That's what we have talked about. So we see that he really organized this party or this National Congress. Now, because of very active Nyasaland African Congress under Dr. Banda, disturbances, riots, and started all over Nyasaland. So because Dr. Banda moved throughout the country and the people were following him, so later on there were disturbances, riots, people were rioting there. So the governor of that time, Sir Robert Anudich, declared the state of emergency in March 1959. Under this state of emergency, the Congress was banned, public meetings were not allowed, and the police were given powers to arrest and detain people without trial. So we see a state of emergency was declared by that time. And Dr. Banda was detained to Gweru in Zimbabwe, and many political leaders were also arrested and put to detention in southern Rhodesia and at Kanjeza in Limbe. And finally, some Africans were also killed, especially at Nkatabe. That is why 3rd March is observed as a Martyrs' Day, or Martyrs' Day, or public holiday to remember those who died for the freedom and independence. So we see to it, Dr. Banda toured the country, and there were riots all over, and the colonial government declared that it is a state of emergency. When we say a state of emergency, it is a country that needs a help as soon as possible. Sometimes when there are floods, we hear the president says, this is a state of emergency. We need help, whatever kind of help. So that's what is called a country that needs help. And again, in 1959, we are saying that Sir Robert Armitage, who was the governor, the British governor of Nyasaland, he declared that Malawi needs help because there is disturbance here, there are riots and whatever. So now, Dr. Banda was arrested and he was brought to Gweru prison in Zimbabwe, and many other people were arrested, were detained without trial, and there were those riots. So that's why even some people were killed. So at Nkatabe there, they were killed, and today we still observe 3rd March as the Martyrs' Day. We are remembering the people who died in the fight for independence. So these were the things that happened during that independence. Still, we are looking at the independent Malawi. But to this one, we need to stop here on part 1 in this unit 17, independent Malawi. But now, here is the work that you need to do. So do this work, and please pause the video, do this work, and after you do it, then write or answer the questions correctly. So next time, we're going to proceed by looking at part 2 of unit 17. And this one will be looking at the formation of the Malawi Congress Party. The formation of the Malawi Congress Party. Be there next time as we continue with this unit. Until next time, thank you so much.